Our next lecture involves what is perhaps the central area of the discussion of the problem of violence in Christian living. Yet it is the one area where practically no discussion takes place. When people think of the term Christian pacifism, they think normally of either the situation of individual violence, that is a Christian who says he's a Christian pacifist, who believes Jesus' teachings require the absolute rejection of the protection of violence. He believes that that is so in personal affairs, or perhaps more commonly even, because of the historical peace churches, in affairs of war. However, what I'd like to do, and we are developing an entire theology of Christian nonviolence or Christian pacifism, is to suggest that there is an area where Christian nonviolence, Christian pacifism, where Jesus' teaching applies in a way far more seriously on a day-in, day-out basis than the isolated circumstances of a man with a machine gun coming in to shoot your grandmother, or war. In order to get into this subject, I think that the best way to describe what we're going to say is that this talk, this lecture, is going to be on the relationship between war and Christian ethics. What is the relationship between law and Christian ethics? Now, when I went to school, and by school I mean grammar school, Catholic high school, Catholic college, Catholic graduate school, in the 50s and early 60s, it was generally conceded, without much thought given to the subject, that what was legal was moral. The civil rights demonstrations that were led by Martin Luther King raised certain problems with that. However, today, I think it would be fair to say in most of our Catholic schools, most of our Christian schools, most of the time, it is taught that what is legal is moral. It is my suggestion, or it is my approach to this, that that is an unacceptable tenet on which to proceed in teaching what human behavior is supposed to be for a Christian. To begin with, let me at least suggest that the gospel, that the ethical system that Jesus teaches, is an ethical system that deals with people's thought, words, and deeds. And that the law also is a system that deals with people's thoughts, words, and deeds. And that they can be, and often are, inconsistent in what they ask and in the motivation they ask it from. This may, in the beginning, look like a political analysis. It is that. Anything that we say here, vis-a-vis American law in the United States, can be applied with equal force to law in any society that exists today. We're just using the American schema because that is what most of the audience is familiar with. So to begin, I know a man who lives on welfare in Massachusetts and who gets about $2,500 a year. He's down and out. He's an accountant, or was an accountant, who's an alcoholic. And this is approximately all he gets. As a matter of fact, in the last 6 months, they've even taken a lot of this away from him. Now, anyone who's making a normal living in society, let's say, is making about, say, $12,000 a year. Anyone who's doing real well is making, say, $50,000 a year. At some point, around 50, 60, 70, whatever the case may be, there's a serious break. Genuine wealth is not accumulated by working for it. That's clear to everyone. In order to accumulate wealth, you have to accumulate it off of the labors of other people. Putting in 8 hours a day of your own time is not going to bring wealth. So we have, for example, in our society, people like H. Ross Perot or the Kennedy family, where the family is worth, the Kennedy family supposedly is worth something in the vicinity of $400 million. The same thing with H. Ross Perot. Now, of course, the difference between this fellow and this fellow, $12,000 and $2,000, is $10,000. Even between the $50,000 man and the $2,500 man, there's only $48,000. Between this kind of wealth and upper middle class wealth, the difference is into the hundreds of millions. This man, although he may never say it, is closer to our friend on welfare here than he ever could be to this group of people here. He's closer to them in his economic interest. Now, the Kennedy family, however, don't represent the paradigm of wealth in the United States. It's estimated that each Rockefeller brother is worth about $500 million, each brother. It's difficult to get your hands on these kinds of figures, but if you include the Rockefeller Foundation, it is evident that the Rockefeller family appears to control wealth in the vicinity of $88 billion. Now, $88 billion goes a long way in society, in this society anyway. What is extraordinarily clear is that in a corporate capitalistic society where corporations are pyramided on corporations, where the reality is that 5 out of the millions of corporations in the United States, 500 of them produce 75% of everything that's produced, what the reality clearly is that in corporate capitalism, if you can own a small percentage of the stock of a corporation, you control that corporation. And therefore, I say, 88 or $500 million or $88 billion goes a lot further than it would on the surface appear. Now, we're saying nothing more than what? That there's a massive discrepancy between those few in society that have a great deal of wealth and the many in society that have very little. All right. Carrying this just statement of economic facts and holding it there for a minute, we have a system of government that has an executive branch, that has a legislative branch, and that has a judicial branch. System of checks and balances. In 1972, the last election before this was taped, what is known is, what's on paper is, that this office, Vice President and President of the United States, cost $100 million. $100 million. Now, where did that money come from? Did it come from this group? Did it come from this group? Did it come from this group? Of course not. That money came from over here. Did you ever try to raise $1,000 for the most worthy cause? Feeding starving children. $1,000, that's all. And we're talking about $100 million. Why do these people give to that, to procure that office? On both sides. It didn't make any difference whether it was Nixon or McGovern. They all got the money. Why? Because they're super patriots? No. They're simply buying the laws to protect their interest, to maintain the status quo of which they're the prime beneficiaries. Now look, people say, yeah, but that's only the executive branch. Look at the legislative branch. Well, in Massachusetts, for example, which is a small state, a tiny state, to run for the United States Senate cost approximately $3 million. When you get out to states like California, you have Senate races turning into $15 and $20 million affairs. Where does that money come from? That money comes from over here. Over here. Now, what are we talking about? We're saying that as far as the executive and the legislature are concerned, what we have on the federal level, just using it as an example, is that this wealthy segment of the society is in fact pushing millions upon millions of dollars every election into the election process in order to put in office those people who make laws protecting its interest. But everyone says, the key is the judicial. Here you have lifetime appointments. Fine, these people, they may not apply or make laws that are fair, constitutional, and so forth, but the judicial will always protect us. I suggest to you, where does the judicial come from? The judicial, say in the federal branch, comes from the appointment of the executive upon the advice and consent of the Senate. Is it likely, in your furthest imagination, that regardless of his competence, William Kunstler would ever see a day on the Supreme Court? Or is it more likely that these people would put people in the judicial branch of government who thought, acted, and believed consistent with the interest of the group that keeps these individuals in office? All that we're saying is what? Alongside the system of checks and balances, there has arisen what I refer to as an economic barrenry that has total input into the three branches of government. We can multiply this and we can go on about the problem. For example, the executive branch is in the process and, of course, does have secretaries. Which secretaries in various forms of regulation are supposed to regulate this group of people over here? Supposed to regulate agriculture, supposed to regulate industry of one form or another. Where do the people come from who are the secretaries? They come either from this group directly, or they come from those people who are responsible to this group. They come here and they regulate this group, and then they go back into the group. Is it so absurd? Does it seem so unreasonable that the year before the so-called energy crisis, when gas prices were almost doubled, oil prices were almost doubled, 1 year before that, the man who was president during the time that there was created an artificial scarcity of gasoline and prices doubled, 1 year before that, Richard Nixon received under the table, according to congressional records, over $13 million from Gulf, Mobil, Exxon, and so forth. Does it seem strange? Of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. All we're saying, and we're saying nothing more than this, is that historically in every society, and as is the case today, there is an intimate relationship between wealth and political power. They go hand in glove, wealth and political power. From the time of the Egyptians or the Babylonians or the Sumerians or what have you, those who have been wealthy have had political power. Now, my question is, if these people make the laws just on a very superficial level of ethics, but bypassing some of the normal etiquette of ethics, that is, things we don't talk about. If these people make the laws, and if they're procuring the office, any one of these offices, is ultimately totally dependent upon getting the money to finance campaigns, money which has to come from here, what is the moral caliber of the laws that these people make? Just take the general statement, that what these people are supposed to be doing is making laws for the common good. There'd be a problem with that in relation to Christianity, because what is meant by the common good? And we'll discuss that later. But what I'm saying is, these people are not acting for the common good. Practically each and every one of them is acting on behalf of interest groups, powerful interest groups that have their own interests first and foremost in mind. Was it so astounding when the world found out that the Republican minority leader of the Senate, Hugh Scott, was taking over $10,000 semi-annually, I believe it was, from Gulf Oil for over a decade, even during the time that he was defending Nixon for taking money from Gulf Oil? Of course not. It's not astounding. And we can multiply over and over and over again instances of people, either directly through lobbies or under the table and so forth, that have simply received enormous monetary and so forth benefits from this group of people over there in order to procure legislation here. The most patent example of this, of course, is the most powerful lobby in Washington, the munitions industry. The question is, what is the value of laws that are not made in the common good, but that are made by legislators and executives and judicials and the judiciary for the purpose of protecting or enhancing the political and financial situation, or sustaining the political and financial situation of interest groups? Number one. Let's look, if you will, from here over to this chart on my right, to get a sense of just how all-encompassing this problem is. Let me point out a phenomena that few people are aware of. By the way, these statistics come from a book called Poverty in American Democracy, a study in social power, published by the United States Catholic Conference. The state of New Jersey, which is the most populous state in the Union in terms of density, it has over 600, I believe it's 629 people per square mile. The state of New Jersey contains 4.8 million acres. Now look at these figures. Look at how much land these companies own in the United States. Continental Oil, 4.5 million acres. Standard Oil of California, 5.2 million acres. Phillips Petroleum, 5.3 million acres. Georgia Pacific, 4.5 million acres. Weyerhaeuser, 5.6 million acres. Southern Pacific, 5.1 million acres. International Paper, 7 million acres. All greater than the state, almost all greater than the state of New Jersey. Gulf Oil, 7.5 million acres. Mobil Oil, 7.8 million acres. Union Pacific, 7.9 million acres. Burlington Northern, 8.4 million acres. Texaco, 9.9 million acres. Standard Oil of Indiana, 20.3 million acres. Does it seem realistic to suggest that the people that own that land would ever not try to take the money that they have and influence the elections of the society, of those people who are ultimately responsible for the political distribution of that land? Carrying it one step further, as harsh as those figures are, when they are coupled with one final statistic, the problem becomes overwhelmingly clear. When it is realized that 70% of our population is now crowded into less than 2% of the land. 70% of the people of the United States is now crowded into less than 2% of the land. When that fact is put against these facts here, it becomes obvious what's happening in terms of the political process. These people here, with their enormous vested wealth, are buying the laws by buying the legislatures and the executive branches of the government and the judicial that will make and interpret laws consistent with protecting those interests against these people. 70% of the people here live on 2% of the land. Now, if we can take a look at just one more phenomena in terms of the relationship between wealth and political power. If we define wealth not as the $10 that you have in your pocket that you need to eat, but if we define wealth as ownership of productive assets in land, and take a look at these figures. In this column here, we have percentage of U.S. households. In this column here, percentage of all U.S. investment assets, wealth, owned by these U.S. households. Now look. The bottom, 9.8%, almost 10%, the bottom 10% almost, of American households own this much of the wealth of the society. 0. The bottom 10% in our society own no wealth. If that's astounding, look at the next figure. The next 50%, we're up to 59% now. The next 50% of the economic strata in our society owns only 2% of the wealth of the society. At this point, we are now at 59% of the people own only 2% of the wealth. The next 23% own 7% of the wealth. We are now over 80% of the people in the society owning a total of 9% of the wealth of the society. And then, of course, if we go down to the bottom line, the top 1.2%, a little over 1% of the society, own 65% of the wealth. That is productive assets in land. How is it possible for 1.2% of the people of the society to own 65% of the wealth, for 70% of the people to be forced to live on less than 2% of the land, for 80%, over 80% of the society to own only 9% of the wealth when you live in a democratic society where supposedly the majority rule. How is it possible that so much wealth is accumulated in so few hands when supposedly in a democratic society all the people have to do is vote a different distribution in power, a different distribution in land, a different distribution in financial, political assets, if you will? The answer is, of course, that these people, that is, those people who are not of the working class, those people who do not primarily earn their living by working, but who earn their living off getting a share of what everyone else does in their day's labor, those people have, over a period of time, bought laws by buying the legislators who make the laws, they have bought laws that make it legal to have this distribution of wealth and political power, and that make it near impossible, regardless of how large the majority gets, for the majority to have a chance to vote that distribution of power, that distribution of wealth out. They have bought the laws. Now the question becomes, directly and concretely, how moral are those laws? How obligated is a Christian to follow a set of laws that have been procured, that have been put together, that have been enacted under those circumstances? And to say that's not the circumstance under which laws that have produced this maldistribution of wealth and land have been enacted, it seems to me it's just sheer folly. On the other hand, why should a Christian follow them? Why do these people want the laws that are necessary to sustain, to protect, and to enhance the wealth which they have already accumulated? They want the laws because all law is based, is rooted in violence. All law is based in violence. An unenforceable law in this society or in any society is no law. By enforcing it, we mean that the organized power of the state, the organized violence of the state, the legalized violence of the state will enforce certain behavior. If you trespass on any one of those 9 million acres that Gulf has, you will be prosecuted, put in jail, you will be hurt. All law must be enforceable. An unenforceable law is not a law. If you don't believe it, regardless how you stand on the issue, simply look and see what was required and what was done in Boston in terms of the busing issue. The judge said this is the law. And literally, thousands of troops, hundreds of FBI men, hundreds of police were brought in to Charlestown and simply surrounded the school, or on the housetops, or in the street. What? These are the enforcers. These are the people that can exercise legalized violence. These are the enforcers of law. These are the people who will protect that maldistribution of wealth, of political power. Those people who have control of that distribution buy legislators to buy the laws, because the laws are backed by the organized violence of the state. I ask you, laws made in this way and backed by that kind of purpose, how Christian can they possibly be? How consistent can they possibly be with the teachings of Jesus Christ?